David began to look with interest at the white tents, on which were apparently painted coats of arms, which David obviously did not know. Suddenly, the boy heard a voice behind him, "Hello, Nanthonin." David turned and saw a stranger who had patted his companion on the shoulder. David realized that the man was speaking a language of no one, and yet he somehow understood it. In fact, he truly heard. "Ferinero Nanthonin." After a while, he also realized that his companion's name is Nanthonin. When the two men had finished their brief conversation, David approached his companion and asked him, "Why didn't you say what your real name is?" "Not matter. My friends call me that." In a common language, the word Nanthonin means mysterious. "Well, you're actually mysterious, very mysterious," said the young man. David and Nanthonin went further into the camp. It turned out to be huge. As they stood in the middle of the camp, David saw in front of him a much larger and orange tent, around which there was much free space, and a large bench and an infrared bonfire next door. Suddenly, a tall upright person came out of the orange tent. She had an orange robe, a leather belt and shoes, and chain mail. At his waist he carried a sword in a decorated sheath. His face was handsome, the hair was chestnut in color and he could see the first traces of graying frostiness. The figure had no beard or mustache and the hair was short cut. The beauty of his face was added by bright green eyes. Suddenly, the man said, "Civilians, unfortunately, scouts bring us bad news. The Vermers conquered the city of Nelthen a few days ago, and our king is in danger." "How's that, Lord Hendron? We have sent half of the army to help the king," replied one of the subjects, who looked more important. "Yes, it's true, but these monsters threaten us that if we approach them, they will cut off the head of our ruler and other captives as well," the Lord replied. "It's obvious, these creatures are unjust, dirty monsters who want only killing and blood," a young warrior interjected with a scar on his cheek. David listened to all this with interest and at the same time dullness. Lord Hendron looked around at the gathering. "Good. And now all scouts, commanders and heroists must come up with a plan that will allow us to save the city of Nelthen. Come to the tent." All summoned by Hendron entered the orange, large tent. Nanthonin also went, so David decided to go with him. "So, are you a commander, a scout or some kind of hero?" the boy asked him. "In this world, I serve as heroist." "And what does heroist do?" "Just a fight. I'm a fighter." When David and Nanthonin were already in the big tent, they and the rest began to wait for the Lord to leave his bedroom, which was behind a canvas wall. The man who had greeted Nanthonin outside looked at David. "Is that your squire?" he asked Nanthonin. "Something like that," the warrior replied, then turned to the boy. "David, this is my friend Turgin. He's a hero just like me." David suddenly came to his consciousness and shook Turgin's hand. "Nice to meet you," he said just quietly, after which he took a closer look at the other warrior. Turgin looked younger than Nanthonin and, unlike him, had fair hair and wore no armor but a light white shirt. On his head he wore a red band and through his back he had iron spears and a long axe resembling a shepherd's axe. A warrior in such light armor, David was surprised, who accidentally said it out loud. Fortunately, Turgin was not offended, but replied calmly, "Each heroist can make or buy for himself any armor he wants. I chose an ordinary shirt because in heavy armor I feel uncomfortable." Turgin prefers to trust his agility more than his armor, Nanthonin explained. David nodded his head as a sign that he understood. Suddenly, everyone fell silent, because after a while Hendron finally emerged from behind the curtain, who was dragging something with him. It was a golden model of the city attached to a wooden table on wheels. After a while, the Lord would pull out a mock-up to the center of the room. Immediately afterwards, someone brought chairs for the gathered. The Lord already had his wooden seat, the backrest of which was in the shape of a tree. With David in the tent there were 21 people at the table and 5 guards. "This is the plan of the city of Nelthen," the Lord began to speak. "I suppose the king is imprisoned in a cell underground or in his own chamber at the tower," he finished, pointing to the tower in the middle of the mock-up. It was huge, along 4 meters, and the breadth too. The real city must have been very large, because one of the houses on the mock-up was only half a centimeter wide. After a while, the Lord opened a drawer in the table and pulled out the bag. Suddenly, he took out some figurines in the size of a plastic soldier. After a while, David's eyes were wiped out, recognizing Nanthonin and Hendron in the figurines. There were still a lot of such figurines. They all looked alive. They even had clothes made of fabric and armor made of metal. The Lord lined them up on the table. It looked quite ridiculous, because it seemed that the serious Lord was playing like a small child. When he arranged the figurines, he pulled a small lever attached to the table. Suddenly, David realized that this mock-up was not a simple plan of the city, but a real machine. Water gushed out of the golden tube, filling a tiny moat. The same happened with a small fountain. After a while, fields with small flags attached came out. The Lord will pull them out and set them next to them. So then, he began, we can't just attack because they are going to cut off King Hurin's head. First, someone, ideally, it should be 2, 3, maybe 4 people. They must imperceptibly release the king. Later, the battle will begin, the siege will begin and the king will be safe. We need to establish a plan of action and find people who will free the ruler. I would choose someone from the shadow unit. Shadow warriors are brave and unnoticed. They work well at night, Lord said. It was already dark outside, so the servant lit the standing lamps on the sides of the room. The servant suddenly spoke to the Lord as if he were his friend. My lord, we made a bed and prepared dinner for you. The Lord must have liked this servant because he thanked him and addressed him by name. Thank you, Nathan. After a while he said to the others. Oh well, it seems that I am waiting for a wonderful dinner prepared by the excellent Potdolid. However, we will move the battle plan to tomorrow morning. It's getting late and we need to rest. If someone is bored, he can stay on guard or practice at the shooting range or barracks. From tomorrow we will start a decent preparation. I will let you know when I am ready to start our plan. Good night to everyone, said the Lord, turning to the rest. The Lord had just turned his attention to David, who was still sitting in his chair. And you, boy, if you are kindly, light a fire outside. The wood is at the entrance, Hendron said. David obediently went outside without haste and found a pile of wood covered with cloth and braided with ropes so that no one would accidentally scatter it. Where can I start here? The boy wondered. David began to pull sticks out of the pile and arrange them into a pyramid in a stone circle. Finally, he laid the wood for the campfire. Okay, but how am I supposed to make a fire? He asked himself. The boy threw some more dry grass into the hearth and suddenly saw a large flat stone. I'm going to make a fire like real survivalists do, he said. He took a simple stick and another with a hollow. He put it with his tip to another stick with a hollow and began to turn his hands with a stick in his hand, rubbing it with a stick into another stick with a shallow hole. After a few minutes, nothing had happened yet. What is it? David asked in a pretentious voice. Oh, yeah, you have to add some dry grass. When he did it, he started the job again. After a few more minutes, a speech bubble appeared. Oh, good. Immediately after that a spark and after that showed up a flame. David did not know for a moment what to do next, but then he came to his consciousness and began to blow lightly into the flame. Suddenly, dry grass burst into fire. David quickly grabbed the burning grass and threw it into the hearth. After a while it started to burn, but at the same time David got burned and he screamed, or, after a while, however, the boy forgot about the pain, because he saw how his fire burst with fire. Yes, I made it. I am the king of fire. Gah. The leg in his pants began to burn, and after a while the flames began to bite him mercilessly into the skin. David shouted, not seeing that an amused crowd had just gathered around. Among those gathered was also Lord. After a while, Nanthornin came with a bucket of water and poured the whole 3 liters of contents on David. A sound of relief came out of the boy's mouth. Boy, why didn't you ask for a fire steel? Said the Lord. You hurt yourself and woke everyone up. At least the bonfire is lit. He finished after a while saying the last sentence with a hint of sarcasm. However, the boy did not pay attention to anyone anymore, because the feeling of relief suddenly turned into an unpleasant burning. After some time, David was already in his tent with Nanthornin. It was not large, but comfortable, spread around with blankets and pillows. After a few minutes, David saw that the Lord and his servant Nathan had come to him. Nanthornin stood up to greet the camp owner. 2 men bowed, but the Lord said to David after a while. Nathan brought the herbs of the Nensives flower straight from the dragon coast of Molia. They should at least relieve the pain. There are also cookies from Cook Poppin. Do you know him? David replied embarrassedly, No, Lord. I don't know, Pupin, really. He is the greatest cook I have ever met. He is Pop-Tollid. Pop-Tollids bake the best cakes in the world. David hardly understood any of this. Is that what he sees and hears is not a dream? Everything that surrounds him here can hardly be something normal. I came here mainly to talk to you. When I heard from Turgeon about Nanthorin's new squire, I was immediately interested. Apparently, the heroists say that they do not need any squires, especially such a great warrior as Nanthorin. Some themselves enter their ranks as disciples, but that's different. David only nods his head stressed. So tell me, who are you and where do you come from? Lord began conversation. I'm not a squire but Nanthorin's companion, the boy replied at the beginning, embarrassed. It's a great honor to be alongside someone like Nanthorin, Hendron said, and I know who you are anyway, he finished. You are a man from the other world. David slowly nodded affirmatively and remembered how suddenly he had appeared in this mysterious place. Everything happened so quickly, too quickly. I wanted to bring you something from myself, said Lord. The Lord pulled out from under his coat a small saber, in which there was a dagger with an orange handle. I hope you know how to use it, but it will be useful to you here, the Lord continued. After a while, Nathan stepped forward with a leather hip strap and a shoulder strap. A pocket and a pannier were also attached to the waist. A bag and dagger could be attached to it. It's for you, Hendron said. Remember, tomorrow morning we will on assembly meeting, we will choose people who will have the task of saving the king, he finished. The young servant and the Lord left the tent after a while. David was now looking at the cake, the herb, and the dagger belt. Nanthorin mashed the herbs in his hands and put them to David's leg. The boy felt a pleasant warmth on his leg that began to spread throughout his body, and after a while he fell asleep in a deep sleep. Chapter 4. The next morning, David and the others lined up in front of the Lord's tent. There were a lot of people gathered. The empty space around the main tent was lacking in space. After a while, Hendron and Nanthorin and a few others went outside. We organized a competition, said the Lord in a loud voice, so they all might hear him. In an hour at most, you have to be prepared. Everyone will come here again and the competition will begin, which will look like this. You will race from the camp to the very top of Mount of Natha and return back. Along the route there will be commanders who will watch that no one cheats, and scouts cannot see you. Those who will be the first and unnoticed by scouts to come to the finish line will be the winners. From among the winners, we will choose the best, and the best ones will go to the rescue of the king in the company of the great Nanthorin. Remember, you start one at a time in 5 people and so on in turn. You can choose groups in which there can be no more than 5 people, the Lord long instructed. So David began to look for people who could join him. After a while, the idea came to him to ask Hendron if he had to participate in this competition, but he quickly knocked this thought out of his head. Suddenly, Nathan came and decided to join him. David agreed. The boy suddenly got an idea and ran to Nanthorin. Hi Nanthorin, will you join me and Nathan? David asked him. Unfortunately no. If I had joined you, no one would have had a chance with us. Besides, the Lord himself would not agree, but if you win, I will gladly join you to the king's rescue. David was a little disappointed about this fact, but after a while he realized that Nanthorin was right. Okay, David replied quietly. The boy again began to look for others who would join him. Suddenly, David heard someone else's voice. I see, young man, that you are looking for someone to join your team. I will gladly join you and your friend. David turned his head to see who had said it. He saw a short person who could be a meter and a few centimeters tall, or maybe a little more. The short man had light hair exactly like David, but only curly. David also saw that he had no left hand up to his elbow. My name is Popin. I baked you a cake at night at the behest of the Lord, David. The boy was surprised that someone so short and without one hand are working in the kitchen. One more of my friends will join. I have more of them, but only one is with me now, Popin continued. David nodded imperceptibly. Bago. We will join those, Popin shouted suddenly. From behind of the tent emerged a very tall and skinny figure with a high hat and a pointed nose, who wore rags. Huh, the character made a strange sound. His voice was gloomy and kind of lazy. Don't be surprised, he is a mudman, otherwise, a gloomy or swampy man. He's always so gloomy, Popin replied to the boy. Hearing this, David grimaced slightly. The boy noticed that there are not 5 of them yet, but 4 he, Nathan, Popin and Bago. Suddenly, an unusually young voice spoke. Can I join to your team? 4 people turned to where the voice was coming from. They saw a dark-haired boy who could not be more than 11 years old. And how old are you? Nathan asked him. 2 months ago, I had my 10th birthday, the boy replied. What's your name? I know you only by sight, said Poppin. My name is Turhin, and you? The 4 companions introduced themselves until suddenly the voice of the loud horns spoke. The Lord is calling us, said Nathan. After a while, all the teams gathered in front of the Lord's tent. Oh no, Bago, rush quickly to the tent for provisions and something else, Poppin said to the mudman. Bago obediently rushed towards their tent like a leopard. His legs themselves were almost 1.5 meters high. Surprisingly, after 20 seconds, Bago came back loaded with bags, and he even had a sword at his waist. It's Justin Kazi, as if so me, Bago said in a wailing voice to the others, handing out an inconspicuous weapons. David was given a kitchen knife, and although he already had a dagger, he did not hesitate to accept the gift. Nathan got a spear and the boy got a small axe. And what about Poppin? David asked a mudman. Potolid suddenly pulled out from behind of the cape a sword, with a white blade and a silver hilt with a curved shape. At this sight, everyone except Muddy was astonished. Bago still had the same expression on the grey face, so it was hard to tell what he was thinking. Where did you get that from? David asked Poppin. I had already dealt with a fight, and I found this sword on a 22-year expedition that changed my life forever. On this travel I just lost my arm, saving one of my friends. David was speech not. Lord knows about your journey, Nathan asked. Nope. It is not necessary to tell him, Poppin replied. They stood there for some time until Lord Hendron and a general finally came out of the tent. The tall general began to look at the teams one by one until he came to David's team standing at the very end. The general snorts with laugh. Servant, mudman, halfling and miners. Don't judge the medical by its appearance, said a familiar voice. It was Nanthonin. Remember? It's a race where you have to go unnoticed by scouts. The team that comes here with the best time and unnoticed will win. The competition is on time. At my sign, the first group starts, then the second and so on and so on. So the first team starts. David, said the Lord. David wondered why Hendron had chosen them first, and why he had named their group David's team. Go forward on this line, Lord said. David and his companions entered the white line. The Lord said, ready, steady, go, let's start. 5 people fired like a slingshot in an instant. Poppin quickly climbed on Bago, and Turhin began to gain such speed that when he jumped, he overtook everyone. David and Nathan were left behind. After a minute, the team was already in the colorful forest. David hastened. He felt that he had more energy in here than in his world. Suddenly, a stone wall appeared in front of them. No, just not climbing, broke down David, who never climbed and had a little fear of heights, or rather that, what he called the fear of falling from a height. The stone wall was about 20 meters high. Fortunately, it had a lot of depressions and ledges of rock, which were easy to climb. The first began to climb Turhin, so quickly that he reaches the first 3 meters in a second. Immediately after the boy, Bago began climbing with Poppin on his back. Once Turhin reached the top, Bago and Poppin were halfway there. Suddenly, under the mudman's foot slipped from the wall. After a while, the skinny Bago with Poppin on his back holding only on his hands. Poppin began to slide off from the mudman's back and hung on his only one hand. Terrified David and Nathan approached to the stone wall prepared to catch their new comrades. David accidentally saw something out of the corner of his eye in the bushes. It's a rope, David shouted and ran for it. The boy grabbed the rope and threw it up. Catch it, David cried out to Turhin, throwing a rope at him with all his might. The boy grabbed the rope and gripped it tightly. Muddy desperately grabbed the rope and began to swing violently on it. At first, Bago only kicked his legs until he rested his feet on the rock. Suddenly, something very scary happened. Poppin's legs slid off the mudman's body and he was now hanging on it with only one hand. Not only that, he began to pull the Muddy backwards, and he himself held only a scrap of his ruffled robe. Turhin used all his strength. The weight of the mudman and Potolid began to pull him forward, which brought him closer to the edge of the landslip. Nathan went to help Turhin and began to climb the wall. Fortunately, Nathan climbed without any problems. Turhin was already at the very edge of 20-meter cliff, but Nathan quickly helped him and now they could pull together the rope on which the mudman with Poppin hung. The boy and the servant began to drag them upstairs. Unfortunately, suddenly a piece of muddy clothes tore apart. Puppin grabbed on at the last second. He was now hanging on Bago's ragged pants. The muddy shorts slid off his legs, revealing underwear with various patterns. Puppin continued, desperately clinging to his pants, but did not last long, holding on to only one hand. Seeing this, David began to squeak. Puppin has already begun to fall. David still could not come to his senses, but after a while he was ready to catch his companion. At the last moment, David caught Puppin falling. However, he did it clumsily and fell to the ground with Puppin in his hands. Fortunately, such a small person was easy to catch. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. "Leave a rope where it was," Nathan replied to David in a snatched voice. "I wonder if other teams will find that rope," David said. This time, Puppin was hooked up with a belt to the rope and they began to pull him on the top. In the end, they did it with David as well. When everyone was upstairs, they saw that at the bottom they could see the silhouettes of some people. "It is the second team that took off," Puppin said to his comrades. 5 friends went further ahead. "I have a hunch that there may already be scouts here," he said after a while. "It's good that there are a lot of rocks here to hide behind," Nathan said. The team began to move on, hiding behind the rocks. "Stop!" cried out suddenly quietly Puppin. "What is it?" David asked. Puppin pointed his hand at the rock. David was a little out of the stone. "He is a commander. He only makes sure that no one cheats. In fact, he probably has to see us. Otherwise, if we win, they will not believe us, because no one has seen us. They will think we've gone beyond the tour for shortcuts or something. We have to show ourselves to this guy," David said. The rest agreed with David. They all emerged from behind the rock. David took a pebble and threw it. He flew past the commander. He turned in the direction from which the stone came and saw a team of 5. The man nodded his head and made a hand gesture that they could move on. Then he wrote something down in a notebook. "I was right." He recorded our team as proof that he saw us. "Others will know that we did not cheat and walked the route," said David. They began to sneak further among the rocks. David looked up and saw a great hill. It was a mount of Natha. After a while, everyone saw a sign in front of them, on which a left arrow was drawn. "We must now go west," Puppin said to the others. After a while, everyone started looking sideways to make sure that no one was there. When they decided that no one could be seen, they began to go west. They had been going like this for an hour. It had been exactly 1 hour since they were at the sign. Suddenly, David's eyes saw a tall, stone-like wooden tower with a pointed orange roof of tiles. "It's an observation tower," Nathan said to David, satisfying his curiosity. "I have an idea," Puppin replied to his comrades, pointing to a tower overgrown with creepers and flowers. "We will weave camouflages from these leaves and creepers. In this way, it will be more difficult to catch us, especially it will be useful at the top, because there are a lot of bushes and trees there," said Popdolid. "It's a good idea, but we have to do it quickly," Nathan said. David began to cut the branches with his dagger, which was best suited for this. When David had finished, they all began to make coats of leaves and branches. When they did, they put them on their backs. David didn't mind because he was wearing a white hoodie. Nathan had the worst, the branches forging him in the back, because he was wearing only a short-sleeved shirt. In the end, everyone went on their way. They walked like this for a minute until they heard human voices behind them. The team turned backwards and saw 5 people from afar. "It's a different group," Puppin said. "Thief will be better off not to be tempted," Bago said. The team sped up and turned ahead again. "Oops," David said suddenly. They were in front of another stone wall, and a high one. No one found the rope either. "Let's move on," said Puppin. Everyone obediently followed him. When they emerged from behind a rock, they saw something they least expected. "It's the way up," shouted an overjoyed David. Everyone saw a winding path and a very nice one. Everyone came closer. David was the first to want to get on the road. "No, this could be a ruse," Puppin shouted to David. The boy made a crooked face and stunned. "Then find me another way," said the boy to Popdolid. Everyone began to look for another way. "There is nothing," Nathan replied. David was looking to the sides, and something flashed before his eyes. The boy looked in that direction. Not far from the stone wall lay a long thing. "It's the second rope. We have omitted it," said David to his companions. "This road is a ruse. We have to get on the tightrope again," Puppin added. Unfortunately, The stone wall was at least 5 meters higher than the previous one and was smoother. How do we throw the rope? David asked. Ideally, someone would climb the wall with the rope and tie it to a tree or something like that, Pupping replied. So such will go will go, Bago said. Maybe Nathan, David said. Nathan looked at David with his unpleasant eyes. Well, what, you climb well and you are strong. I certainly will not go, because I will fall and kill myself, David replied. Nathan looked at him with his grey eyes. The young servant began to look closer to David's face. I'll go, Terhin said. Everyone's eyes turned to the boy. You climb well, but you are definitely too small and you're too young, Nathan said. Too young for disability or death, he finished. Okay, so I'll go, Nathan said in the end. Yes, but quickly, because the other team is approaching. Nathan picked up the rope and began to climb with it. In a few moments he had already covered 5 meters, but the higher he climbed, the more difficult it was to climb the mountain due to the steep and flat wall. It was difficult to find a place to grab on. When Nathan was there, halfway through his companions thought he could not climb any further, but the young servant grasped at the smallest depressions and dead eggs in the rock. David wondered how it was possible to climb so well, because Nathan was only holding on to the tips of his leather shoes. Nathan still had about 8 meters left to climb, and David thought the stone wall was completely flat, but Nathan had 3 more meters in the blink of an eye. He hung there for a while, looking for something to grab and climb on. He still has only 5 meters left. Suddenly, Nathan saw a small gap in the wall that could fit his fingers into, but unfortunately the small hole was high and he couldn't reach there with his hand. Suddenly, David gritted his teeth and he was motionless because Nathan had just done something stupid. The young man jumped from his seat, trying to grab a hollow in the rock with his hand. Fortunately, Nathan grabbed onto it, but he was now hanging on one hand. However, his companions knew that he would not last long, because Nathan was of thin stature. The Lord's servant, however, did not show fear and did not dare to do what most people would do. He was calm and fortunately did not give up. Nathan stretched out his other hand and grabbed hold of it, putting it in a hollow, and clenched his legs on the rock. He had only 3 meters left, and he had nothing to grab on, and he had less and less strength. David broke down again, for Nathan bounced his legs off the stone wall, grabbing the tall hanging grass at the top with his hands. The clump of grass, however, could not last too long. In fact, it immediately began to slowly break out. Fortunately, Nathan caught the ground at the top of the cliff at the last minute. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Nathan lying on top. Only his legs were still hanging outside. Nathan lay motionless for a moment until suddenly something happened that froze David's blood in his veins. The ground on which Nathan was lying collapsed, or more precisely, slewed under his weight. If the servant had not been on the very edge of the pit, this would probably not have happened, but in the place where he was lying, the ground from the ground protruded outside the cliff and the earth simply collapsed under him. David involuntarily shrieked like a monkey in terror when he saw the collapsing pieces from the dirt that splashed apart, banging on the ground. After a while, the boy saw nothing but dust that was floating in the air. David ran up there, stumbling over the scattered stones at least 5 times. The teenager threw himself into the rubble with despair of digging up his recently met friend. David scattered the earth all around, looking for Nathan. David dug up the soil, throwing it on the other pile. After a while, he dug everything up. David screams in despair when he saw that Nathan was not among the rubble. Hey, help me, my shirt is about to rip off. David heard a voice from above. No, now I hear the voice of Nathan's spirit. How could this happen? David lamented. Help, a voice coming from above will shout again. Oh no. Now I hear the voice of the dead Nathan coming from the heavens. David howled, opening his tearful eyes, and looked up. When the boy did, he saw something he least expected. He saw Nathan hanging on his shirt on something David couldn't see. Nathan's soul flies to heaven. No, Nathan, don't leave us. David broke down, who did not see that his friend was just hanging on a root protruding from a stone wall. Shut up, yourself, and help me, Nathan shouted to David, who huddled and rocked back and forth, crying like a small child. He behaved like a total idiot and the servant could no longer bear the sight. Help, Nathan turned to everyone else this time, but only after a while. Poppin and Bago moved forward, who were stunned by what they saw. If it weren't for this root growing out of the rock on top of Nethin, he would have ended up as a cripple or even a corpse. When Poppin and Bago were at the rock itself, they poked David. The boy looked up again. This time he noticed that Nethin was hanging on a thick root, which resembled a towel hanging on a hanger. "How, this is possible?" David shouted at the sight. Bago approached the stone wall and took the rope in his hand without crouching, but bending down slightly and lifting with his long hand. "Have it and catch it," Bago said to Nethin vaguely, throwing a rope at him. Dirty Nethin grabbed a thick rope with one hand. "So what now?" Nethin asked. "How's that what? You have to climb up at," Bago replied in a pretentious voice. "Like how?" The servant broke down when he heard these nonsensical words. "And how? And so does the swack. You have to climb up on the string," replied Muddy. "What?" Nethin asked, who hardly understood any of this. "Do it just Motley, you haven't just climbed upstairs apart," Bago replied. David and Turhin were splay hands to their foreheads like a facepalm, and Poppin burst out laughing when he heard Mudman's reply. "Well, what will you say? Nethin is just supposed to grab the line and Klimbula, but someone has to go upward and grab the string so that the dog does not fall on us." "No," Bago replied with an indignated look on his grey face. "I'll go in and tie the rope to the tree," Turhin replied quietly. "I'll go too," Bago said. First, Turhin began to climb with a neat movement, followed by Bago, who during the climb looked like a skinny spider climbing. When Turhin had already defeated 10 meters, he said, "Hey, Nethin, look, now it is easier to climb because the earth has collapsed." The dirt crumbled and formed earth elevation. "Don't talk, just climb, I can see it," Nethin exclaimed. "My shirt is about to tear." He finished. Turhin obediently began to climb faster. The boy was still 10 meters away, and after a while he was already at Nethin's side. Chapter 5. Turhin grabbed Nethin by the arm and patted him in a friendly way. "Hey, do not do this or I will collapse," Nethin shouted. "Good. I'll get you out of here. I'll tie a rope to a tree and give it to you," Turhin replied. "Good, but please quickly, because I'm feeling badly because of this hanging. It's good that my shirt is durable, because I would have fallen a long time ago and, ow, this root stings me in the back." "Faster," Nethin said. "Now will not be folded in the back or hour. I'll get you out of here more famously and effectively, and better about yes, I'll get you out of good at fan Turhin," Bago interjected, climbing behind the boy. "And how are you going to do it? How do you get me out of here?" Nethin asked him. "Oh, Novemberfell is nothing to do, deal buddy. Hang almost strongly and very powerfully and cover a pain, because it will be all." After these words, Bago quite brutally grabbed Nethin by the arm with a long hand, jerked it, tearing his shirt and destroying the cape from the branches. "Allay yourself, what are you doing?" Nethin got angry. Bago grabbed him with one hand without the slightest difficulty, even though he had his hand as thin as a stick. The young man was hanging in the air, held by a big, skinny paw. "Let me go," Nethin screamed angrily. "I'm not that so stupid, it is so stupid. When I will empty you, you will fall and fell will be a bang," Bago replied with a serious expression on the face. Nethin closed his eyes in embarrassing. "So let's fly," shouted Bago, tossing him up. Nethin opened his eyes and realized with horror that he could not feel the clenched hand of Muddy on his shoulder. He also realized that he was flying up and then starting to fall. David looked at the scene, praying in his spirit that Nethin would fall to the other side of the cliff, not to the bottom of the abyss. Suddenly, everyone heard someone's voice on the top. But it wasn't Nethin's odd voice. When Turhin went upstairs and was already standing on the ground, he saw Nethin lying on something. Immediately after Turhin, Bago entered. "Get out of me," a muffled male voice came out from under the body of the young man. Nethin struggled to get back on his feet. Now they could see what, or rather who Nethin was lying on. They saw on grass a halfling with long and light hair and a short beard. "What was that supposed to mean?" asked the halfling. No one answered his question. There was a longer annoying silence. The halfling looked around, lying and looking to his sides until he kept his gaze at Bago. "Bago," shouted the overjoyed halfling. "Yes, and you, Cordrin, my dear buddy," Bago said, throwing himself in a run with his arms wide open for Cordrin. The halfling quickly get up so that the mudman could hug him. "I'm so happy that I see you again," Bago said. "I'm happy too," Cordrin replied. Suddenly, their amusement disappeared without a trace. The small man turned towards the cliff. Pupin climbed the wall, followed immediately by David, who fell to the ground because of fatigue. There was a moment of silence. Finally, Cordrin was the first to speak. Pupin. The barefoot halfling threw himself into the arms of the second halfling. Pupin cried as he hugged his friend. Poptolid wiped away his tears and turned to where David, Terhin and Nethin stood and spoke to them. Meet Cordrin, my friend, whom I saved years ago by losing my arm. Introduce yourselves, get to know each other. I am Nethin, said the first servant, and silent fell when he saw Cordrin's ominous gaze. However, after a while, the halfling burst out of laughing and said, Oh, you are the one who fell on me from the sky, Nethin. After a while David said, I'm David, and it's Terhin. He pointed out the boy. Okay, we already know each other, and now I want to know how this happened. Nethin suddenly crushed me from the sky with his ass. I went to the forest to settle there, an urgent matter, you know what I mean. When I emptied myself, I suddenly heard a bang behind me. I buried my treasures and went to where the sound was coming from. At first I did not know what was the cause of this noise, but after a while I saw from a distance the collapsed ground above the chasm. As I got closer, I wondered what might have been causing the ground to collapse. As I came even closer to look down, I was crushed from above by this Nethin. It is clear that it was me who was shoving at him up and fell for you, Bago replied. Cordrin fell silent. He didn't talk for a moment until he suddenly burst out laughing. Then tell me why you did it. Why did you come here? The halfling finally asked them. Nethin answered his question, but did not finish his speech. We climbed up the mountain and hurried, because we are participating in the, and he interrupted, competition. We are wasting time, David cries unexpectedly. Mudman stood at attention and strained his brown eyes. Wait, what competition? Asked the halfling. We participate in certain competitions. If we win it, we will be chosen for the mission and save the kin, said Popin, but his speech was interrupted by David, who again interfered. But you don't think I take it seriously? I thought we were attending this competition just for fun. I'm not going to fight any monsters, and anyway, I'm not sure about what's going on here, because you know, I've been moved here. Well, Nanthorin leave me here, kidnapped. Terhin began to look at David with a puzzled, incomprehensible gaze and wrinkled his smooth forehead, but Popin looked strangely as if he had understood everything. I know, this giant is really mysterious. People say that Nanthorin is not human or knows how to take other forms, and he can turn into three kinds of people. Many call him the guardian of the three worlds or the being from behind the worlds. Popin replied with a serious expression. David was as stunned as Terhin was when he heard this. The teenager looked only with a dull look at Popin. Hello, is there who? How do your life live? Bago began to ask David. Even that did it help. David did not believe and remembered again the moment when he found himself in this strange place. Bago finally tapped his eyebrows and tapped his knuckle on the young man's forehead. That was the only thing that worked. David would shake off, and after a while he replied. Quite possibly. After all, if Nanthorin were human, he couldn't bring me here, because it looks like I'm from another world. I knew it, Cordrin said. As soon as I saw you, I thought you weren't from here. With the rest, we also do not come from this world, but you're David, but rather our ancestors were from the other world, he added. Popin nodded affirmatively. Well, as you know, Popin, people came to this world centuries ago and lived together, the halfling continued. You don't have to tell me that. I know the history of this world better than you do. Besides, it is not known how many of today's teachings are true, Popin replied with a smile. Terhin and Nethin apparently didn't understand anything, because they looked with a dull and incessant look at Popin and Cordrin. Wait, because I'm not understand anything. Are you just telling me that I'm not going to go home? Looking at you, I have doubts that you come from my world, because you look more like a simple schizophrenia. But since I am here, when will I return to planet Earth? Asked David with a broken voice. The halflings responded to him at the same time with a shrug of the shoulders and continued the conversation. So David listened. Our young friend should get back home. If he came here, he should come back. After all, this was our journey to open the gates to the other world. Besides, now Nanthorin watches over everything, who, after all, took David here himself. Since he brought this boy here, he should take him back. Cordrin said. Papin nodded. So maybe November we go on the way. After all, we can talk on the way, Bago interjected. Right, let's move on, Papin replied, then moved forward quickly. In an instant, both dwarfs forgot what they had just said. The team was guided by Papin. They have already crossed to the other side of a small, colorful forest. Before their eyes appeared a path leading to the top of the mountain. Stop, shouted quietly Papin. Everyone stopped immediately. His head rose from behind the trees, looking sideways. Do not go out on the road, at least for now, Papin replied this time in a whisper. Why? Nathan asked worriedly. Quiet already. Do you hear what I hear? Everyone began to listen. David began to think that he was actually hearing something. Yes, these were the sounds of footsteps and conversations coming from the left. When Papin tilted his head slightly again, he saw 5 human silhouettes in the distance. The second team goes. Apparently, they use the path leading to the top. Hide, it will be better not to show them. The other 5 persons obediently searched on the moss among the bushes, where their robes blended perfectly with their surroundings. Only Cordrin was conspicuous because of his unclothed yellow shirt, but after a while he hid a bit behind a tree. The noises grew stronger and stronger. It was possible to catch individual words only that they were mainly laughing. Papin put on a grey cape and again barely bowed his head from behind the tree. The careless team was already about 10 meters in front of Papin's head and was passing by the boulders next to the path. Papin noticed that in one large rock there was a small cave at the bottom, into which only someone slim could fit. David and Nathan took a chance and also tilted their heads slightly from behind the trees. They saw an approaching team that was not afraid of anything and was moving relatively fast. David had already clearly heard what that group of people was talking about and laughing about. The highest member of the foreign team spoke to the others. You don't even know what the embarrassment was like then. When I put the other one in the head, he flew straight at the pot of soup, which spilled straight on the cook. The Aishat thought that he had poured soup on him specially, so he also knocked him down. Boo-ha-ha. His face landed straight into the cauldron. The others stopped and burst into tubular laughter when they heard this. But their laughter was suddenly interrupted, because suddenly 2 mysterious guys dressed in green jumped out of a tree branch and a similar person came out of a small cave, but only dressed in black. David, terrified, had already thought that the team had been attacked by some bandits, but Papin reassured him, they are scouts. This team has already lost. If we had chosen the path that led upstairs instead of the steep wall, and had not hidden in the forest, David, we would probably have been the same as them. David only nodded and began to turn his ear to them, because the Black Scout had just spoken. You are the first to be found by us. You have already lost and you are eliminated from the competition. Nothing here after you. You better go back to the camp. When David heard this, he understood that they were probably in the first place, that they were knocking what was in the lead. I said, Papin said quietly, this path is a ruse. Let's go on before they notice us. The fair-haired dwarf signaled his hand to others to go further north. They apparently didn't care about winning, Nathan said after a moment. Probably, you have heard what they've been talking about. I doubt that such a person would be sent on such an important mission to save the king. Does that mean you really still want us to go to the king's rescue? I'm a little afraid, David replied. Are you a coward? Papin asked. It depends on what situation, the boy admitted. Believe me, David, I fought with Cordrin and Bago with much more terrible monsters than you've heard of. You can't be afraid, and these creatures will see and sense it. David thought for a moment and wondered what kind of expedition Papin meant. When was your trip? He finally asked. About 150 years ago, Papin replied with a normal expression on his face. David stood as if wrought up. Wait a minute, how much? Because I think I misheard something. The halfling also stopped. Nope. You didn't mishear anything. And what? David was speech not. It just clogged it. The boy spoke only after a long while and did it very slowly. So, how old are you? Because you look like you're 30 years old. Ahoho. I'm not that young. I'm 300 years old, my friend, 10 times more than 30. David wiped out his eyes and grabbed his head. Papin, said David again. Papin, explain what is happening here at all, because I do not embrace anything anymore and I will go crazy and, what's going on here? Papin looked at David with astonished eyes, but suddenly he again seemed to understand everything and said, well, yes, I have heard from Lanthornim that your world is perhaps 10 times shorter in life because of various factors, probably because of the poisoned environment, which I do not doubt at all, some flood, wars and, what was it called, and so some diseases that come from the air, any toxins, probably, I don't remember. Today, most people live to be 600, but in this beautiful land there are still few who are in better health. Other people's lives only 300 years, but they live everywhere else. David had already opened his mouth to speak, but he could not cough up anything. He made only a strange, dull wail. Amazed, David realized that he felt stronger and that he had more energy in this world. Only now did he notice it. Puppin. I don't know what's going on here, but it's extra, David said in the end. Hey, what are you standing like this? Faster, called Nathan suddenly from afar. Puppin finally started running. David shook himself off and ran after him towards his friends. Chapter 6. Several hours have passed since David's conversation with Poppin. The team continued to climb up the forest edge. Normally, David did not like to climb mountains, but it is different when there are colorful trees around unknown places and soft moss under his feet. The path next to it has already disappeared. The area has become stony. Before they climbed higher, the terrain was getting harder to overcome. Suddenly, Cordrin said, Normally I could be your guide, but it would probably be a scam on the part of our team, but either that maybe nothing will happen when I tell you a secret. What secret? Everyone asked in chorus. Well, it is a gorge that is not far from here. It should shorten your climbing. How will it shorten? Nathan asked. The terrain will be increasingly steep and dangerous. The gorge should make it easier and shorter for us to get to the top. Oh, it's nothing that you told us this secret, because I knew about this gorge anyway, TWOU said. Really, I have my hiding place there, Cordrin said. Hey. I also have my lodge there. Only when I gathered food there did it always disappear. The next day when I came there, mostly cookies and gingerbread disappeared. So it looks like I was stealing them, the halfling said. Cordrin, how many more times do I have to tell you not to steal? Said an indignant Poppin. Yes, but when I took the cookies from the table, I would give a few apples in return, Cordrin admitted. Really, strangely enough, I've never seen apples on my table. Well, no, not only a thief but also a liar. Puppin turned to Cordrin in a broken voice. I swear, I always left fruit there, assured the halfling. Okay, it doesn't matter. Lead us better to this gorge, Cordrin, said Poppin. The halfling nodded and moved northwest. The others ran after him. After a minute, they found themselves in front of a stone wall and turned right. After a while they found themselves in front of some creepers. Cordrin and TWOU moved apart. Creepers similar to lianas. In front of them appeared a gorge wide enough to fit 2 people passing by each other. Everyone ran into the pass behind Cordrin. After about 100 meters, the team saw a small hole in the stone wall on the right. Cordrin went down to go inside, and when he did, he saw something there, or rather someone he least expected there. He didn't really expect to see anyone there. In a small cave by the table sat on a pillow-hooded figure, dressed in green. When the dwarf looked more closely, he saw that the man was eating something round. They were apples. Cordrin had already taken air into his lungs to shout at the fruit thief, but Poppin immediately clogged his mouth. Poppin pushed him away from the hole and said to him in a whisper, It's a scout. We may have been noticed by you. Cordrin nodded his head as a sign that he understood. Everyone fell silent. The silence, however, was broken by a voice coming from the cave. Delicious. The host again left me good apples. Apparently, he doesn't mind if he keeps leaving these fruits in the same place instead of hiding them from me. Wow. There were also gingerbread. I remember my mom doing food like that. I don't think that anything will happen when I will blow a little work these professions and I'll go sleep on the mattress. You shithiel, Cordrin hissed at the intruder, who hadn't heard anything anyway. After a while, the team heard footsteps coming from inside and the voice of the scout. Apparently, the intruder went to bed. Puppin looked inside and saw him lying lazy on a large mattress full of blankets and duvets. I know now what is probably the cause of the ever-blown up, TWOU said quietly. Not nice, not nice. I've heard that no scouts are lazy. On the contrary, Nathan said. Let's go further. This lazy man will not notice us, said Poppin to the others. The team carefully bypassed the cave and continued to follow Poppin. The gorge was getting narrower. but after a dozen or so minutes they saw the edge of the gorge and ran outside. After a while of climbing, they were already at the very top of the Mount of Natha. David turned back to the south and saw other mountains stretching in the distance, and a forest in front of them. David focused his attention on something that was on one of the mountains. It was a golden light. Papin also looked in that direction and guessed what the boy was looking at. "It's the Gate of Three Worlds," he satisfied the boy's curiosity. David again turned his gaze to the north. He saw a large boulder a few meters away. He walked over and started climbing it, thinking he would see a better view from there. When he was upstairs crouching, he saw an armed man leaning against a large spear on the left. Next to the armed man stood a small white tent, in which probably the second soldier was sitting. David signaled with his hand to the others to avoid the boulder. They all came out from behind the boulder, and David came down and followed them as well. The armed man noticed them and came closer, writing something down in a notebook with a leather cover. "This is the end of the route, you can return to the camp, but remember, of course, that during the way back you cannot be noticed by scouts either. I've written down your team in a notebook. You're here first," he said to the team. "THX, we made it. Goodbye to you," David said to the soldier. "Goodbye," the warrior murmured in response with a strange expression on his face. "What does THX mean?" David's Nathan asked, as they turned back. "He?" "Never mind," David replied, embarrassed. Nathan nodded and stopped speaking. The team again entered the gorge and allowed themselves to jog, but after a dozen or so minutes they slowed down. A small cave appeared before their eyes again. Already from here it was possible to hear the loud snoring of the scout, although according to them he should not be employed as such an important person due to laziness. TWOU overtook everyone and was the first to look into the hole. After a while, the others also looked inside. Of course, on the large bed slept on his stomach a hooded man. His snoring resembled the crunching of a pig. "I will make sure that this scout will be punished for not fulfilling his duties. When the Lord and the scout commander find out about it, he's going to have a splash," TWOU said suddenly in an angry voice.